Hello, my name is Amy Maxwell, and I will be presenting the paper Autonomous Vehicle Security by Design. So there's a lot to cover here. First, I will do an introduction on autonomy in modern vehicles and discuss some of the prevalent security issues. We'll go into a little bit more on security by design and the key principles there. And then we will be applying those principles specific to autonomous vehicles, or AVs, and then we will discuss a little bit deeper on how to implement some of these security considerations. All right. So the Society of Automotive Engineers, which you'll be hearing a little bit more about during this presentation, has proposed 6 levels of vehicle autonomy, with level 0 being the lowest, meaning no autonomy whatsoever, which is described in this graph here. Everything that is level 3 or above is what we're going to be considering an autonomous vehicle, or AV, as I will continue to refer to it as in the rest of this presentation. Understandably, as the level of automation increases for these vehicles, also the level of security risk increases. And another important consideration for the remainder of this paper is that modern AVs are definitely cyber-physical systems, but also can be considered Internet of Things systems due to the amount of integration they may have over network communication. So several CPS and IoT security issues do apply to autonomous vehicles, and the below graphic shows these generic components in CPS and some of the possible attack targets against these cyber-physical systems. In general, cyber-physical systems are complex, heterogeneous distributed systems and are typically consisting of a large number of sensors and actuators connected to a pool of computing nodes. So sensors kind of communicate with each other through various modes of communication, and the aim of this kind of a system is to perceive and understand changes in the physical environment, analyze the impacts of these changes, and make a decision to respond to the changes and issue commands to the underlying physical objects in the system. These systems can operate either with full autonomy or at least provide support for a human-in-the-loop mechanism as part of these semi-autonomous control functions. So in the case of autonomous vehicles, this would be something less than a level 5 on the autonomy scale in the previous slide. So these kind of closed-loop processes allow CPS to remotely influence, manage, automate, and control many industrial operations, which can include autonomous vehicles. So there are many CPS security concerns. There are several that are specific to autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles may have network connections to connect them with the outside world. These would fall into 2 major categories: vehicle-to-infrastructure connections, or V2I connections, and vehicle-to-vehicle connections, V2V connections. There are several risks associated with these connections, which could be used to communicate with traffic systems, either based on some third party or other vehicles that are on the road. The risks associated with these are an attacker can gain unauthorized access into the vehicle, can get any sort of unauthorized information from the vehicle systems, or maybe in some cases could modify the information in the systems and gain control of the vehicle. There are several cyber-physical systems which are both independent and overlapping, supported by actuators and sensors, such as tire pressure in the car, light sensor in the car, obstacle sensors. And most of these communications in these CPS systems happen through a wired connection, which is called the control area network. There are several risks for some of these systems. Examples of these systems can be, your cruise control, anti-lock braking, assisted parking, and they're under the risk of gaining access from someone outside the vehicle, or these transmissions can be intercepted. Obviously, in these cases, these intra-vehicle networks must be rigorously protected from access from outside the vehicle for maintenance, manufacturer analytics, and just generally strictly controlled. Now we will go into some key principles of security by design, which of course means designing the system from the beginning with the security objectives in mind. So there are many key principles of security. Traditionally, these standard security policies are guided by the generic triad, the CIA triad, which means confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And there are requirements, at least at the message and data level. Generally, the CIA policies are reinforced with application-specific security requirements, and can depend on the system, obviously. When you're designing systems for security, you would typically follow 5 steps, which are outlined here. First step is to identify the security objectives and requirements of the system. Second is to assess the value and sensitivity of the system, or more or less how likely it is that someone's going to want to gain access into it. You must also define the security policy based on the security requirements, which were defined in step 1, but also can be defined by outside things such as security standards or regulations. Number 4 is to estimate the capabilities of the adversaries. For step 2, you're estimating how likely it is that your system would be attacked, whereas 4 would be what kind of capabilities would these attackers have and how much damage could they really do. 5, you would be designing these control features based on the sensitivity and risks of the system and align with the policies and objectives that you identified earlier. So in modern CPS and Internet of Things systems, this threat model also is discussed together with the notion of attack surfaces, which is an important point when considering the security of a CPS, just like an automated vehicle. An attack surface provides an entry point for an attacker to gain control of the system or to exfiltrate information from the system. The adversarial model, which is important for some of these steps in the previous slide, is a formal definition of the attacker's capabilities, and it's based on 3 key points. One is the attack objective, and that means for a given CPS, what is the attacker trying to do? They're trying to break into one or more security objectives. 2 is the communication capability of the attacker. An example of this is, can this attacker intercept messages over various communication systems? And the 3rd is the computing capability of the attacker. So even in the event that someone is able to break into the system, they may not be able to actually do any damage or gain any information from it if they don't have the sufficient capability computing capability to gain control of or damage a system. And it's worth noting that before this paper, there was really no well-defined adversarial model for autonomous vehicles, and this not being well understood has been one of the main challenges in designing a security model for AVs. One of the other important points of security in general is the trust model. This helps to secure communications between various components and is important in both cyber-physical systems and AVs. These sort of models usually involve cryptography to achieve confidentiality, integrity, and authenticity. Usually the way this would happen is like a key management system based on a trust model. The way that would happen is a trusted third party or TPP could act as an authentication server or issuing certificate authority. But there are also kind of other trust models such as web of trust for PGPs and distributed trust for blockchain. There are also several important trust infrastructure components for cyber-physical systems. The first one related to the previous slide is the infrastructure for trust management. That would be your key management protocols for secure communication. However, it's also important to have secure routing protocols, which are important for communication between devices, include the authentication and encryption of messages, multipath routing, and secure geographical routing protocols. Heterogeneous network integration is also particularly important for CPS that may have very diverse components, and they will need to be able to talk to each other. Secured resources, also important for any system. That would be the computing and storage blocks. And trusted identification, which would be important to ensure the identity of the various components. So now that we have a good overview of security by design for CPS and the challenges there, we can move into security by design specific to autonomous vehicles. And I have the subcaption there, the prime objective is safety. So that will be an overriding theme throughout the rest of this presentation, is that the goal of securing an autonomous vehicle is safety, both for the person in the car and for people and things externals to the car. So following our steps defined earlier in the security by design principles, we have to consider our security objectives, and in order to do that, we have to have a good understanding on how an autonomous vehicle actually operates. So there are three sort of broad categories here. The first is communication. So that could be operational logs sent to the manufacturer for maintenance and analysis, wireless or wired interfaces for software and firmware upgrades, communication with traffic management or navigational systems, and there also should be an interface for remote control of the car in case of an emergency, which is something we see often in some of the examples out there today. Sensing, this is sensors detect physical environments and avoid collisions. It's a key part of the cyber-physical system for an autonomous vehicle. And also, most importantly, decision-making capabilities of the AV. So there need to be navigational related controls for autonomy based on traffic routes, automated steering in accordance with the road conditions, and safety-related control functions. So based on that operating model and some of the stuff we've seen earlier, this is a relatively comprehensive list of security objectives and requirements for an autonomous vehicle system. Integrity of the remote control functions of the AV so that no attacker is able to take control over the AV is a key one. You wouldn't want anyone to be able to access the remote control function that's supposed to be there in case of an emergency. The integrity of the sensor systems so that navigation and safety-related control features will not be interfered with by attackers. Also very important and key for CPS security. The integrity of the safety-related control operations, such as braking and speed control. The integrity of the navigation-related control systems, such as steering, braking, and speed control. Also, confidentiality of communications between the AV and traffic management system. Confidentiality and integrity of communications between the AV and its manufacturer. Integrity and authenticity of communications between the AV and its maintenance workshop, and confidentiality of cryptographic keying material stored inside the AV, and they need to be ensured so that attackers cannot bypass higher level security mechanisms. So, a lot to consider there, many risks. Another important consideration are the AV safety standards, which not only encompass some of the requirements and principles on the previous slide, but also some other standards. An important consideration here is that an AV should be modeled as a socio-technical system where safety is of the utmost importance. Basically, any time that an autonomous vehicle is concerned, decisions made by this vehicle could affect human life. So that has another important consideration for the safety and security of an AV. There are a couple of standards that exist for AV safety. One is the ISO 26262, and this is a standard that provides a safety life cycle throughout the phases of this vehicle, like management, development, production, operations, service, and decommissioning. Another important part of this policy is the Automotive Safety Integrity Level Measure, or ASIL, which is a measure of severity, exposure, and controllability of the autonomy. And another important standard which came about after some cybersecurity incidents is the SAE J3061, and this standard addresses cybersecurity specifically, and it delineates the scope of cybersecurity. Most importantly, stating that cybersecurity critical systems are not necessarily safety critical, however, the reverse is true. So this kind of lays the groundwork for safety being the most important key consideration. So as I explained in earlier slides, there isn't really a good adversarial model for AVs, but this paper does present this based on several real-world attacks they've observed. So this adversarial model has two properties. Property 1, an adversary is capable of intercepting and tampering all inter-vehicle and intra-vehicle communication. Property 2, an adversary is capable of introducing malicious nodes in the inter-vehicle and intra-vehicle communication network. This paper also goes into the attack services and system security model for the AV. So the attack services of the AV can be described really in three layers, which is shown by the graphic here to the left. The core layer, which is the physical enclosure of the actual autonomous vehicle itself. The interface layer, which is the gateway layer. It's characterized by the collection of connectivity interfaces between the AV and the external world. And third is the infrastructure layer, which is composed of all of the infrastructure and backend modules which are trusted to and connected to the AV. And this will be important as we continue to explore how to secure an AV. So those were some of the principles of how to secure by design for an autonomous vehicle. This last section here goes into some of the specifics around how this security should be implemented in the design. So the first important part of implementing security procedures for AVs is establishing a security perimeter. So this perimeter divides the autonomous vehicle into segregated security domains, and each of these domains has a distinct threat environment. So one of the most important things there is it's going to simplify the distinction between cybersecurity incidents, which is more sort of to do with the electronics, and the physical tampering of the vehicle. There are three earlier sort of security perimeters defined, and that's what we just talked about as far as the previous slide. And basically, this paper reinforces that a well-designed security architecture has to reinforce these three boundaries in order to help secure the vehicle. The second key thing to do is to establish trust. This paper goes into roots of trust and how essential they are in securing communications with both internal and external devices. One of the key challenges with using a key management infrastructure is it's very hard to associate the key with the actual device. This paper suggests that one of the ways that for AVs that you might be able to solve this challenge is to use something called physically unclonable functions, or PUF. And this basically ties the device identity directly to the physical characteristics of the device itself. So it will be unique to that device. A couple of other important trust-related things in actually implementing security for autonomous vehicles is the trust infrastructure. This is something that really has to be agreed upon ahead of time, and it needs to make sure that it provides regular support to end users, provides for secure patching of software, secure boot, and prevention of theft. And that really helps by identifying certain parties that are trusted and certain parties that aren't. Trust management, also very important, and it has to be rigorously maintained and dynamically established, which basically means that over the lifetime of the vehicle, there are different entities that will have to be trusted, especially for vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure interactions. So the most important part of implementing a security procedure while designing an AV is securing the safety operations, as we discussed earlier, since these are socio-technical systems. So all AVs are different and have to have different security concerns, but here are a few generalized examples of things that could go wrong and how to mitigate them in AVs. One of these concerns is collision avoidance. So there's a risk of an attacker gaining control and forcing a collision. The way that this can be mitigated is to design a real-time embedded independent obstacle sensor actuator system, which will override safety and navigation switches from the car if necessary. So that's basically an independent collision system that can provide a separate check. Navigation, similarly, an attacker can mount an attack through a third-party navigation interface. The way to mitigate that is to have a supplementary independent GPS system so that the car is aware of its own position, and this will in turn reduce the singular dependency on this third party. So if someone were to tamper with this third-party navigation interface, the car would have a backup system. The third security concern is remote control. An attacker can achieve control of the AV through a remote control device. And the way to mitigate this is to install an onboard IoT communication monitor to flag unusual activity. So all of this has been very important as far as designing with the principle of security in mind. However, ongoing security management is absolutely necessary to continuously assess and mitigate security challenges during the full life cycle of the AV. So there's something called the Threat Analysis and Risk Assessment, or TARA, and it's specified as part of that SAE J3061 standard, but it actually leaves choice of methodology open for assessing this. So there are quite a few different approaches, and that's going to be up to the individual company that is doing this and their design. So below are a couple of methods for assessment. They include the TVRA, software vulnerability analysis, and attack tree analysis. So over the course of this presentation, we've walked through some of the definitions of security threats for CPS and IoT systems, as well as AVs. We've talked about designing for security specific to AVs, and also how to implement some of these security concerns. Conclusion is a security by design principle for autonomous vehicles has thus far been poorly designed and understood. These AVs can be considered both cyber-physical systems and Internet of Things systems, so both of these types of systems need to be concerns when thinking about security. And the security requirements and controls for autonomous vehicles have important safety concerns and thus should be designed with security in mind from the get-go. Thank you for listening to this presentation.